welcome to Another Day, Another Evil. I'm your host, Georgina,
And I'm Melissa.
and today we're going to be looking at Claudia Lawrence's disappearance, which once I've started doing a deep dive on it, I think it's going to be a really long episode, so we're just going to dive straight in. Okay, so we're going to go back to March 2009, where the historic city of York is in the early hours of the morning and it's really quiet. At 6 a.m., a chef fails to arrive for work. She's never missed a shift before, and her name is Claudia Lawrence. She's never seen again. So, Claudia Lawrence was a 35-year-old single woman, a talented chef working at Goodricke College at the University of York. She lived alone in a modest terrace house in Heworth area of York. So, for our listeners, York almost feels like you're stepping into a living storybook. It's a compact and walkable city where every street corner is packed with 2,000 years of history. It was founded by the Romans and shaped by the Vikings. You can still walk the intact city walls, which loop around the centre. And at the heart of the city stands the York Minster, which is one of the largest Gothic cathedrals in Northern Europe. Before Claudia Lawrence's disappearance, it was known to be a safe city. So Claudia was described as a sociable and independent woman. She spoke often to her parents, Joan and Peter Lawrence, and had friendships both locally and further afield. Nothing in her life was suggesting that she wanted to disappear. Claudia Lawrence was born on the 27th of February 1974 in Malton, North Yorkshire, which is less than 20 miles from York. She grew up in a close-knit family with her mum, dad, and older sister, Ali. She had a comfortable childhood. She played the flute, and on Saturdays, the sisters would go for riding lessons. Horses became a lifelong passion for Claudia, and she continued to ride until the time she disappeared. Claudia's teenage years were seemingly as content as her childhood. She would wander into the market square with her friends, as we all would do. She attended York College for Girls before pursuing her passion for cooking at a local catering college. After working both front and back of house in hotels and restaurants around York, in 2006 she took a job as a chef at the University of York and purchased a terrace cottage in Heworth, a suburb of York, only a few miles from where she worked. Heworth is a nice suburb, a sort of place in which people would settle down and create a life.
I don't know if you want to enlighten any of our listeners who are not British as to what a terrace house is.
Yes, sorry. So yeah, a terrace house is basically just a row of three or more houses. They're normally 2 or 3 stories high, very compact. They normally have some sort of like alleyway at the back of them. Some of them have gardens, some of them don't. It all just depends really. But yeah, it's very much a kind of small house joined on to a row of houses. So when she moved to Heworth, she met her friends Susie Cooper and Jen King, who all spent their time as the Three Musketeers drinking in the Nag's Head, a central and focal point of her life. So firstly, now I've given kind of you a overview of Claudia and kind of her upbringing and kind of who she was. I think it's really critical to outline the timeline as clearly as possible to kind of understand her final movements. So on Wednesday, the 18th of March 2009, which as of tomorrow, we're on the 17th anniversary, which for us recording, it will be tomorrow. However, it will have been and gone for the time that everybody else will listen. So yeah, on the 18th of March in 2009, CCTV captured her as she left for work at around 2:30 p.m. Her dad confirmed looking at the CCTV that it was Claudia, and she was walking home from work that day instead of driving, which she might normally do, as her car was in the garage. At 2:50 p.m., she was seen on CCTV posting a letter outside Melrose Gate Post Office. It's about halfway home for her. The contents and addressee of the letter are still unknown to this day. Some sources then suggested she got a lift home from her colleague, but I couldn't quite find full confirmation on this. But she was back at her home around 3 o'clock, so it can be assumed she definitely got a lift from someone. The next sighting of Claudia was around 3:10 p.m. by a local childminder, Linda Chapman, who spoke to Claudia on her way to the school run. At 7:15 p.m., a suspicious figure wearing dark clothes with a rucksack is seen on the CCTV entering Heworth Place around the corner from Claudia's house in the opposite direction to the Nag's Head, and he's walking away from the crossing outside of her house. So the Nag's Head is a pub that's about 4 doors down from Claudia's house. Again, it's very kind of local to them, and she was there all the time. So this figure, presumably a male, definitely looks like that on the recording, disappears from view. So he could either be in the alley directly behind Claudia's house, or there's also a street further down behind Claudia's house, which he could have been going on to. Around a minute later, he comes back in view and is walking towards Heworth Road. And something really strange happens then. So he abruptly stops where he is when he sees another person walking down the main road, and he waits out of sight until they've passed and then continues on. Watching all of the CCTV footage on the case, it is a really bizarre thing to watch how this person is acting. He's basically walking towards the main road, so it's like a T junction almost, just to kind of give you a bit of an idea on that, since you haven't watched the CCTV. It's like a T junction, and he basically stops as somebody's walking across that main road and kind of like moves out of view, which is really, really strange behavior when you could just carry on walking. Like he wasn't like moving out
Mm.
of the way of anybody, or moving out of the way of a car or anything like that. He just stops walking, and that's
Mm.
it. So local neighbours think that the man on the CCTV could actually be Richard Cartwright, who is a local landlord. He owned a few properties in the area and was quite often kind of going in between them to check that they were okay, there was no issues, all the doors were locked and everything like that. However, we can't confirm this as he died a few weeks after Claudia's disappearance, unfortunately, due to natural causes. It is key for me to outline here that Richard was never a suspect in Claudia's disappearance, and he was a much loved member of the community. So, going back to kind of Claudia in this timeline, at 7:27 p.m. on the night of March the 18th, 2009, she's speaking with her dad, Peter, and then she talks to her mum on the phone and finishes up on the phone with her mum around 8:23 p.m. Both her parents say that she's her normal, cheerful self.
Can I just clarify then? So we last confirmed her sighting at 3:10 with the childminder. Then she's
Correct.
kind of nobody sees her until kind of 4 hours later.
Correct. Yes.
So are we assuming that she was in her house then? She was seen at home, went home, and then she's just stayed at home. That's kind of the assumption.
That is the assumption. However, as we kind of pick up further on, it's never known whether these phone calls with her mum and dad, obviously with them just being phone calls, we don't actually know where she was when she took them.
Okay, yeah.
Um, so she might not have been at home, but the assumption is that she didn't leave because we never see her on any of the CCTV that is kind of around her house. However, again, it doesn't fully encompass all of her house. She could have gone
Yeah.
somewhere without being seen on CCTV.
And presumably she never said to her parents, oh, I'm actually X, Y, and Z somewhere else.
No, she never said anything to her parents. Like I say, both her parents say that she seems like her normal self, and she just told her mum that she was going to bed because she was at work early the next day.
Okay.
So after she comes off the phone with her mum saying that she's going to bed, she receives a text from a male friend who lives in Cyprus at 9:12 p.m. That text message is never opened, and we can't confirm any further contact after this. So the last known contact with Claudia was at 8:23 p.m. with her coming off the phone to her mum.
Okay.
So between 9 and 9:30 p.m. on the evening of Wednesday, the 18th of March, CCTV images from a bus that's across the road from a house sees a white Astra van, which has never been found. This will be significant later on in the story, so just keep that little nugget of information pinned and bear that in mind. So moving on to Thursday, the 19th of March, 2009, she's due at work at 6 a.m. And if she was to walk to work like she had been doing because her car was in the garage, she'd have needed to set off around 5 a.m., which March in the UK around that time, it is still quite dark. It isn't, the height of summertime where we're having sunrises at, 4 a.m. It is still quite dark at that time. There were some potential sightings on the most likely route that Claudia would have taken for work that morning, which have been scrutinised again and again and again. So CCTV picks up a person at 5:07 a.m. who walks down the alleyway behind Claudia's house and then emerges 49 seconds later. So this person is of similar build to the one that was seen the night prior, which was suspected to be Richard Cartwright, but again, we can't confirm that. At 5:35 a.m., there is a sighting of a man on Melrose Gate Bridge by a passing cyclist. This would have been around the time that Claudia would have reached the bridge by foot-ish. The man was described to be slim, around 5'6", wearing a black hoodie and had a cigarette in his left hand. This man, again, never been identified. And then at around 5:42 a.m., going back to the CCTV on Heworth Road, so the CCTV outside of Claudia's house, a silver Ford Focus, it was a 1998 to a 2004 model, was seen with its brake lights coming on as it kind of draws level with Claudia's house. There's no obvious reason on the CCTV, like somebody crossing in front of it, traffic lights, other stopped vehicles. There's no kind of reason for that car to have stopped. So it kind of suggests that there might have been a reason, maybe potential interest in the property, but nothing else is kind of seen on the CCTV. The colleague who gave her a lift home the previous day, or allegedly gave her a lift home, sometimes did pick her up for work, but he didn't go past her house that day. And the driver has never been conclusively identified. Could Claudia have got in that car for a lift? It seems that we might never know. So around half an hour later, at about 6:10 a.m. on the University Road, so that's very close to her workplace, a morning commuter claims that they saw a car parked up on the verge with a passenger door open and a couple near it potentially arguing. Appeals were made for this couple to kind of come forward and no results came of this. At 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 19th of March, her shift manager called her mobile, which basically just rang out. She didn't answer it, it just kept ringing. And then shortly after 12 p.m., around 12:05, her phone was turned off, which is very suspicious, really.
So she was due at work at 6,
Yeah.
but her manager didn't ring her until 10.
I don't
Is there
know
ever an
whether,
explanation for that?
no, and I don't know whether she rang a few times and 10 o'clock was the last time she rang before we realised that her phone then got turned off, or whether that was the only time that she rang. I would kind of assume that it would have been a few times beforehand.
Yeah, because it's not a small little independent coffee shop that she worked at where there might have just been her at work, like York University. It's the college at York University, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, you would think there's definitely more than one person working in the building or who
Yeah.
who would realize that she hasn't turned up. Like if I'm due to work, start work, and the person who's meant to be working with me doesn't turn up, I'm fucking furious. And if I know them, I'm ringing them and asking them where they are. And if I'm not, I'm contacting my manager going, where the fuck's so and so? They were meant to be here
Yeah.
and I've been shit on basically. Like they've just not turned up.
Yeah, so I want to say that probably 10 a.m. might have been the last time that the phone called her. Um,
Okay. But we're not 100% on that.
we're not 100% on that.
Okay. Just trying to get it straight in my head. I just feel like that 4 hours
Yeah,
seems like a long time to be missing somebody in that kind of environment where that I can't imagine that there was just Claudia who was meant to be at work.
yeah, definitely. And I think there'll be a fair few times throughout this that you are a bit like, what? What's happened? Because I started this knowing the case. The more I've investigated it, the more confused and tangled and yeah, it just nothing quite makes sense. I think that is a really important case to to look at because it is so confusing and complex and complicated.
Hmm.
So yeah. So her shift manager calls her, a mobile rings out, doesn't answer, and then around 12 o'clock. So around I think it was about 12:05 to 12:08, her phone turns off. Now I don't know whether I say it later on, but I'm going to say it now. Her phone turns off. It is not. It doesn't die. It doesn't drop off of the network, it turns off. So somebody physically pressed the power button to turn it off. Like it wasn't just dropping off the network and picking back up again. They can identify that that's what it did.
Okay.
So obviously, we don't know who turned it off. We don't know whether it was Claudia. We don't know whether it was somebody who kidnapped Claudia or abducted her. Sorry. We don't know whether it was just picked up on the side of the road and somebody turned it off. We don't know.
Okay.
And then Susie Cooper, so one of her friends, was due to meet Claudia at the Nag's Head on the evening of Thursday, the 19th of March. So she was the next person to realise that she was missing. Now, as I said earlier, the pub was only a few doors down from where Claudia lived, and Susie went home without hearing anything from Claudia. So she did try and ring her. She did try to, text her and be like, are you coming down? Are you having a drink? And I just think that it's quite strange being that close to somebody's house that she didn't just pop round and go get her. And I'm saying this from hindsight, and I'm very aware that, she probably hates herself for not going, and I'm not calling shade on her or saying that she should have gone. I just think that it's something to note.
Yeah, I think I've been in situations before. And obviously, this is the time where people had mobiles. She had mobiles, she's called. And driven, I've contacted other people. And when I can't get hold of them, I've driven to that person's house. So if the pub is a few doors down, I'd have definitely walked to her house and been like knocking on her door if I couldn't
Yeah,
have got hold of her. And like you
yeah,
say, like that's in hindsight. It's but like it's uh it's easy to say what you could have, would have, should have done, but yeah, like you say, just something to bear in mind, I suppose.
definitely
It's strange
something.
from my point of view, anyways.
Yeah, and like you don't know what that relationship was like because every friendship is different. Like I have friends that I hardly speak to, but I would still class them as my best friends because when we do speak, it's like nothing's ever changed. Like we just pick it back up again. And then I have people that I speak to every day. So, every friendship's different and everyone's relationship is different and how, you know, they interact and everything can be totally different. So yeah, it was just something that I thought was a bit interesting to know, knowing how I would have reacted. But again, need to say that in hindsight. So then going on to Friday, the 20th of March, 2009, Susie rang Peter, so Claudia's dad, to see if he had heard from her.
And just to check, so she was meant to meet her on the Thursday.
Yes, so
Yes.
Susie was meant to meet Claudia Thursday evening. She
Okay.
didn't turn up, and then on the morning of Friday, the 20th of March, she rang Peter.
Okay.
So Peter had actually been part of the friendship group within the Nag's Head. So on a Sunday afternoon, he would often meet Claudia for a drink and then kind of have a few drinks with Claudia and her friends. So I think that Susie ringing Peter is quite a normal thing to have done. That was the best person to ring. Whereas, like, I would potentially, if you couldn't get hold of me, it wouldn't be necessarily mum or dad that you would get in contact with. It might be somebody else. But I
Yeah.
think that's quite a normal thing for her to have done. You don't always
Okay.
have kind of your friends' parents' numbers to hand. So it's
Yeah.
other people that you kind of ring to try and get hold of them. So yeah, Peter then rang Claudia's work, only to find out that now we were on the second day that she hadn't turned up. So bearing in mind the first day was the Thursday, it's now Friday. So this is the second day that she hasn't turned up for work.
And work haven't flagged this with anybody, like a emergency contact.
No, nothing's been flagged as of yet. I don't know what everyone's work protocol is for people not turning up and how many times you've got to not turn up for then something to be flagged. Again, it's in 2009, so again, I definitely don't know then. I know that some of my old jobs, how it would have worked, but again, 2009, it was a very different time. And like I said, York was known to be safe.
Yeah. It's fine. Yeah. Like you say, you don't know what the protocols were. And I've never actually been in a situation where I've missed work without telling them that I'm missing work. But I would think that if you miss work and they were unable to get in touch with me, then they should be ringing my emergency contact to ask if they know where I am. I feel like it feels like a flaw in the system there, like definitely a concern if you can't get in touch with the person who's not turned up for work
Yeah,
or their
definitely.
emergency and you're not trying their emergency contact.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in kind of a few jobs that I've had, and I know that, if somebody doesn't turn up for work, we're reaching out to them if we can't get hold of them. We've sent people around before to check that they're okay. And luckily, like it's always been, something stupid where, they've not got in touch with us or whatever. And it's not been as sinister as this. But yeah, I think hopefully nowadays it's definitely different, but then it doesn't seem that they had flagged it with anybody. Peter was the first person within Claudia's immediate family to know that she hadn't been to work for 2 days.
Okay.
So it was at this point when he knew that she'd not been at work for a couple of days that he went to her flat in Hewer. He obviously probably had a set of keys like dads do. I know I have a set of keys for your house, so if anything happened, I could go up in there. So again, that's not abnormal for us. I know that it might be for some people that have family, it might be bizarre that your dad would have a set of keys for your house, but that isn't something overly abnormal, I don't think. And
No.
everything looked in order. It wasn't like he opened the door and it looked like there'd been a fight or anything like that. Her shoes were gone, her slippers were where, they would have been by the door as if she'd left for work. Her bag was still at the house, which had her purse, a driving license, a passport, her credit cards, but her phone and her work rucksack were both missing, which included her Chef White's straighteners and presumably her house keys.
Okay.
So at around 2 p.m., he rang North Yorkshire Police to report her missing, which was almost 48 hours since the last known contact that Claudia had made. which, as we know now, the first 48 to 72 hours are the most critical, and that
Mm.
was wasted. It was just totally wasted. For no fault of anybody, really. And I'm not blaming anybody for, not reporting a missing before that. But it's key to note that, the police say that the first 48 hours are critical for a reason, and that wasn't utilised for Claudia. So within 5 minutes, the police were at her house and were swarming Heworth. It's key to note here that Peter phoned the police before he phoned Claudia's mum Joan or her sister Ali to see if they'd seen or heard anything from Claudia. Now, this is according to Joan, who you'll hear later maybe doesn't have the best relationship with Peter. However, it is something that's key to note that, he phoned the police straight away, which I'm not saying he shouldn't have done, but you'd have maybe thought that he'd have rang Joan or Ali to maybe see if they had heard from her before ringing the police.
Yeah, I suppose. Playing devil's advocate, she'd not turned up for work for 2 days and one of her best friends couldn't get in touch with her. So I can kind of see why, if you don't have the best relationship with the other person, you might think, well, if she's not getting in touch with her mum and she's not talking to, like, I can't get in touch with her and she's not turned up for work, then this is red flag, red flag, red flag. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not calling shade on him at all for doing that. Like, it's good that he rang the police when he did. How many times have you heard people not ring the police because they don't think it's a big deal? When it is, I'm just saying it is maybe strange that he didn't clarify that, you know, everybody in her life hadn't seen her, maybe.
Yeah.
So, following this, the media descended on the area for the big story that was the disappearance of Claudia Lawrence. And they used the Nag's Head pub, which, again, 4 doors down from Claudia's house, as a media hub. So, unfortunately, the Nag's Head, although it was key to the investigation, it wasn't properly cordoned off, and therefore any key evidence that might have been there might have been contaminated from the get-go with it not being properly cordoned off. Um, but we'll never know that. However, it's actually unknown when Claudia officially went missing, as we alluded to earlier. There's still debate as to whether it was the evening of the 18th of March or the morning of the Thursday, the 19th of March.
So, remember when I mentioned the van that you needed to put a pin in?
White Astrovan?
Yes. So, it was reported that on Wednesday, the 18th of March, or Thursday, the 19th of March, a jogger had been accosted by a man in a white van in the Melrose Gate area. And remember, the Melrose Gate area is an area that Claudia would walk through to get to work. So, could this be the same van spotted by the bus CCTV? Could this person have something to do with Claudia's disappearance?
So, unfortunately, as we all know, people go missing every day that we never hear about. Often it can be teenagers or young adults, people having mental health crises who end up appearing within a few hours or days after running away, or more seriously, never turn up and we might never hear about them. So I put in a Freedom of Information request to North Yorkshire Police and found that the number of missing person reports received by North Yorkshire Police in 2009 was 2,724. According to this request, I also asked how many of those were unsolved. The answer I got was one. So presumably it's the one we're speaking about right now. Obviously, I am very aware that statistics of crime and of reporting are not the best things to be looking at because not everybody reports crime. Not everybody, like we say, some people don't think that they should. Sometimes they do report it, but because of the nature of things, it might be logged not as a missing person and because of something else.
Yeah, and I guess as well, if you're saying one's left unsolved, if they've closed some cases without actually getting a resolution, I don't know how that works in terms of what the legal requirements are to close a case, but I think you hear that and you hear that from in some situations and sounds like cases have been closed when they shouldn't have been.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know whether maybe it's got something to do with family as well, as to whether you have it kept open as a missing persons, or then whether they can start a murder investigation even if they didn't have a body. Presumably, I'll go on to kind of say, the thought now, 17 years on, is maybe she isn't missing and there is something worse that's happened. So it's whether the family have a say in how it's logged and whether they bear her as dead, because that is up to the family, I believe. I think that that's right. You can you can decide whether your loved one is classed as deceased or not. So maybe it's something
Yeah.
to do with that as well. I think it's just important, to note that people do go missing every day, and thankfully, a lot of the time, people, and it is often younger, maybe teenagers or young adults, or people with mental health issues or going through crisis who do go missing, and thankfully they do show up. However, the Claudia Lawrence disappearance kind of seemed to be different from the beginning. As I say, a lot of them are younger adults or maybe people going through crises, and Claudia didn't really fit into that category of a runaway. She was in her mid 30s. She had no kind of previous signs of going missing. As far as we're aware, there are no mental health issues there. And it was just an unusual situation. There was no clear reason for Claudia to disappear of her own accord. And from the get-go, North Yorkshire Police launched one of the biggest investigations in recent British history, not without its issues, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But I think we do sort of have to give North Yorkshire Police a bit of a round of applause here as to how serious they took it from the beginning. Because how many times do we hear, oh, well, it's an adult, they can do what they want. They might not have just told you where they're going. Like, she has free will, she's allowed to go out, it's not a child. How many times do we hear that when actually this time they didn't give us all of that bullshit?
Yeah, and I guess as well, especially since they'd already lost the first 2 days, which are deemed critical, like they didn't just even put it off even more. Like they still took it seriously.
Definitely. So yeah, more than 100 officers, 70 volunteers. They got reinforcements from other sources. They had sniffer dogs. They did fingertip searches, all in hopes of finding Claudia Lawrence. Within the first 10 weeks, however, there were no breakthroughs on the case, despite all the appeals from the family and the police. Posters of Claudia were plastered on lampposts. Officers combed through the undergrowth in Heworth, checking nearby streams, speaking to everybody. And within this first 10 weeks, Claudia was described positively by everybody, which you would expect for a young woman who has just gone missing. However, the narrative of this was about to change, unfortunately. So, the initial officer in charge, DCI Lucy Pope, fronted an early press release on March the 23rd. However, as a shock to everybody, it was found out that she was actually one of Claudia's childhood friends, which led to her being taken off of the case, and Detective Superintendent Ray Galloway took the lead. Now, Ray Galloway is one that you will hear massively in relation to the Claudia Lawrence case. So, 5 weeks after Claudia disappeared, North Yorkshire Police announced that the inquiry was now being treated as a suspected murder investigation. So, Detective Superintendent Ray Galloway went on BBC's Crime Watch, which I don't know if you really remember Crime Watch, but for our listeners out there, it was a popular show in the UK. I don't know when it actually stopped being aired, but it was where police and journalists like reconstructed
I
crimes
think it's
to.
still, I think it's still been aired because there is a case that I'm currently researching and they're doing a renewed appeal on Crime Watch.
Okay, so it's still going. Brilliant. That's fab because, Crime Watch is brilliant. And like I say, it's where police and journalists work together to reconstruct crimes, to appeal to witnesses, to try and get everything that they possibly can. So that went out 11 weeks after Claudia's disappearance. Now, this is potentially where the narrative around Claudia changed. So he stated on Crime Watch, bearing in mind millions of UK residents watch Crime Watch. It is big, and especially then, it was definitely in its prime. He stated that, quote, some of Claudia's relationships had an element of complexity and mystery to them. I'm certain that some of those relationships were not known to her family or her friends. Now, that statement is the statement that had a catastrophic impact on how the public viewed Claudia. And then, as a result of that, I believe how the investigation then went.
Yeah, I can vaguely remember the switch in kind of the we need to find her, we need to find her, we need to find her to, oh, she's actually some terrible person that, and then kind of, I mean, obviously it happened a long time ago, but it was in York. We live close to York. I can just vaguely remember it kind of, it'd been really important to find her to just kind of switch in and us not hearing anything. So yeah, I didn't realize
Yeah,
it was to do with this.
yeah. So then, obviously, the media had an absolute field day with that. And tabloid newspapers, obviously, we know that they're not
Mm.
potentially the best at being,
Diplomatic.
thank you, yes, at being diplomatic in certain situations. They labeled, and I mean, you can go online if you search in Claudia Lawrence disappearance, you will see all of this media. It has not been taken down, it is still there for everybody to look at. And it really does paint her as, a home wrecker, a scarlet woman, a heavy drinker. It almost gave this idea and painted this picture that somehow Claudia deserved whatever had happened to her, and maybe it wasn't important to keep looking for her. As you say, you remember that switch. And unfortunately, we see it all too often that there's this idea of an ideal victim, which is something that criminologists quite often allude to. I did criminology at uni, and the theory was introduced by Nils Christie in 1986. And it's basically this argument that there's an idea of this ideal victim, and it's a social construct. There are certain victims, and they're normally women or children or elderly people who are more readily granted in society this full victim status, where there are other victims who might receive less sympathy and less recognition of victims. And unfortunately, that seems to have happened with Claudia Lawrence. Her disappearance began with her being viewed as this perfect victim, a white, young female who needed all of this attention to find. It was really important. And then Detective Ray Galloway went on Crime Watch with all the good intentions of trying to get more information around Claudia's disappearance. And then, following that, she then somehow became somebody who maybe brought it on herself and that's why she went missing, or something, you know, had happened that meant that she had left her life or gone missing or whatever it is. And I think that big switch really was detrimental to the police's investigation. So, as I say, Ray Galloway went on Crime Watch with the best intentions and really wanted to look for Claudia and put all of this information out. And he really was just trying to reach out to people who may have known about these relationships. And Peter, her father, was actually quite understanding of this statement and said, police need to know about her private life. If that had something to do with why she's gone missing, then yeah, we need to talk to these people that might be involved that we might not know about. That not everybody knows everything about everybody. Like you wouldn't expect her mum and dad to know about all of these people that she
Mm,
was potentially having relationships with because they might not have meant anything. It doesn't matter. But
mm,
I mean, I know that my mum and dad definitely don't know about every person that I've had a relationship with. So Joan, her mother, however, felt that it was very unnecessary for the police to go on to Crime Watch and make these accusations and felt that it was very untrue. So Joan is a devout Christian. She brought up Claudia in the same way, and as a devout Christian, she felt that Claudia would have the same beliefs and felt that that would have meant that the accusations against her couldn't be true. And I don't know about you, Melissa, but I just want to touch here a little bit on victim blaming and how it is. I think people are very quick to judge women.
yeah, don't get me started on this. But I think, yeah,
The
it's definitely one rule for one. Well, it's one rule for women, one rule for a man, and somehow it's always the woman's fault. Like it takes two people. If it's an affair, that the allegations are, it takes two people to have that affair. And actually, if Claudia's single, does that not actually make her less blameworthy? Because she's not actively cheating on somebody.
Yeah,
But somehow, yeah, yeah, it's a very, it's a frustrating topic. I hate the whole, oh, it was the woman's fault.
yeah.
Why? Two people were involved, two adults made a decision. And actually, if you are the person cheating on somebody, in my opinion, that makes you worse than the person who, and if you're both cheating on somebody, then you're both as bad as each other. And
Yeah,
if you make a choice to have a relationship with somebody who is already in a relationship, you're not forcing them to do anything. It's
it's a
morally
blurry
question.
line, isn't it?
Yeah, it's moral. It's not okay, but it doesn't make you worse. It doesn't make you a bad. It's not all like the blame doesn't automatically go on your shoulders.
No, and I think that we really do see this a lot in the media where it is very much, well, what were you wearing? How drunk were you? This, that, and the other. And I do think it's key to note that in 2009, it was very much more blameworthy on women, I believe. I think we have made strides recently in the UK to be less blamey on women. I'm not saying that we haven't got anywhere else to go and we still have a lot to do, but I do think that maybe we're talking about it in 2026 with hindsight again. It does make a difference.
Yeah, I think it does. I'm not sure
But
I agree with you that we've made strides forward. I still don't even feel like we've made any difference.
no, and maybe we haven't. I like to
But
think
yeah,
that we have.
yeah, there is definitely a victim blaming culture. There's definitely a culture of I think there's still strict expectations of what women can and should and are. And if that is flouted in any way, shape, or form, then they are automatically the worst people in the world. And I think you see that in terms of victims, you see that in terms of female killers, particularly when they kill their children. I think we just kind of accept that men are okay killing, like raping and killing their children, but if a woman does it, it's automatically seen as being worse. And obviously, I am not saying that that is okay. I'm not saying that they are not bad people, but the comparison when you put them next to men who do the same things is definitely a very there's a lot more anger, there's a lot more hatred towards women who do not behave in the way that society tells us we have to behave, whether
Yeah.
that's through criminal acts or whether it's just through social violations. If you are loud, if you are opinionated, that's not okay. You're a terrible person.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're just as bad as the women who are out there killing their own children for some reason.
yeah, and I think it's interesting looking at how the what adjectives are used to describe women and men. I was watching something last night on TV and it was about this woman killer. And basically they were like, oh, she was, very loud and flamboyant and this, that, and the other. And I was just like, I wonder how you would describe men. What words would have been used for men in that
Yeah,
instance? So yeah, I think it's very interesting to kind of compare it and look at that. And I don't think
yeah,
I don't. It really doesn't matter whether she slept with anybody, whether they were married or not. But I think that it's interesting here because did that maybe have an implication on the investigation that then men didn't want to come forward because they were then going to blow up their whole entire life because their wives or girlfriends or partners or whoever was then going to find out.
yeah, for sure. And like you said, I think that adjectives, like the whole um, use of language is really interesting. And obviously, as a linguist, it's one of my real like interests and it's one of my real pet peeves. And it's one of those things where people are just like, well, I just said it. And I'm like, no, but words have an impact. Like the way you say things matters. There's obviously a lot of interest into how headlines in the media are portrayed instead. So like the where you put the focus in a sentence
Yeah,
instead of a man killed a woman was killed by a man automatically kind of puts the blame on the women for some reason. Like, oh, this woman was raped by so and so. No, no, this person did a terrible thing. Like, it's really important how we use language and recognizing how we use language. So when people are like, oh no, it's just a way of saying something. No, it's not. It has an impact. The
yeah,
way
and I
you say
think
something is really important and it does have social consequences for people.
yeah, and I think it is. People think it is just it's a way of saying something, but that is because we are in a society that is predominantly a male society, and that is just the norm for us. But it takes people to question the norms and to make real change. So looking at how things are said and the way things are said and what exact words are used in what exact way, it takes that to make change. And I think that that is something that we really need to look at, especially with the media, because they do have such a big, important role in some
Mm,
cases, such as Claudia Lawrence, the appeals. You know, they were so important to be used. The media was so
mm.
important that, to get her face out there and to really appeal for her. So then this other alternate
Theory
theory
and
and
then
wording,
perspective.
yeah, perspective, this whole other perspective to start
that
it
actually has
really does
no
just show.
impact. Yeah, that shouldn't have an impact on the investigation, but obviously massively did.
Yeah. So, further investigations brought to light that Claudia had been spending a lot of time in and around Acomb. So, Acomb is around 5 miles away from Heworth in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Nothing did come from this lead, though. The Nag's Head had also been searched with dogs, and a bedsheet with a spot of blood was sent for analysis. The DNA was found to be inconclusive. So, after a couple of months, North Yorkshire police had collected over 1,000 witness statements, searched 240 properties, and spent around £750,000. And then the investigation obviously had to be scaled down and ended up being scaled down to 7 officers. In 2013, Neil Roots published a book titled Gone: The Disappearance of Claudia Lawrence and Her Father's Desperate Search for the Truth, with Peter, her dad's endorsement. The police also announced that in 2013, the Major Crime Unit in Harrogate would review the case alongside several stalled cases. Martin Dales, a spokesman for Claudia's father, Peter Lawrence, said that it was good that fresh eyes would be looking at the case. The review of the case included carrying out new forensic work and searches at her home on Heworth Road, stating that they had found additional fingerprints at her home using techniques not available in 2009. Detective Superintendent Diane Malin, so the lead on the Major Crimes Unit, also stated they established a male DNA profile from a cigarette butt found in Claudia's car, which was in the garage when she disappeared. However, this DNA profile had not matched anybody as of yet. Could this cigarette butt be linked to the man seen by witnesses on Thursday, the 19th of March, 2009, or simply just one from a garage worker or an other unrelated male? Finally, 5 years after Claudia's disappearance in 2014, police made their first arrest. A 46-year-old man was held on perverting the course of justice following a search at a pub in Acomb, where her phone had been found to be in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. A 59-year-old man was also held on suspicion of murder, leading to a house in the Burnholme area of York, less than a mile from Heworth, to be searched. Both men were released without charge. In 2015, 4 local men who drank at the Nag's Head pub where Claudia frequented were arrested on suspicion of murder. However, after going to the Crown Prosecution Service in 2016, the 4 men were released without charge due to lack of evidence. Further, in 2016, the police spent 2 years looking for new leads and theories, such as the theory that what happened to Claudia actually happened on the evening of the 18th of March and not the following day. On the 31st of July 2019, the Guardianship Act 2017 came into effect, largely driven by the tireless campaigning of Claudia's father, Peter Lawrence, OBE, to protect families from the added financial stress during traumatic disappearances. This act, also known as Claudia's Law, allows families in England and Wales to manage the financial and property affairs of loved ones who have been missing for 90 days or more. It enables appointed guardians to handle tasks like paying bills, managing bank accounts, and selling property to prevent financial ruin. Prior to this law, the person had to be declared dead before their finances and property could be overtaken.
That's really interesting, actually. I've never heard of this law, especially given how recently it's actually come into effect. Although 2019 is 7 years ago, which feels like 2 minutes. But that's great that he's done something so important because I guess that's one of the things you just never even consider, do you? Like all this day-to-day stuff still has to go on. And if you're having to deal with that whilst you're stressed about this person who you love been missing, it's great that he's able to get some kind of effective change in place to prevent this added stress in what is already such a horrific and stressful time for families. So yeah, great.
Yeah, and Claudia's 35. She had her own job, she had her own car, she had her own house. Like I said earlier, a lot of people that do kind of go missing are younger people, so potentially don't have
Mm.
things to worry about in that sense. but it's, you know, Peter Lawrence was a solicitor and
Oh,
he didn't know how, it all worked and the missing people, and he couldn't figure out how to take on responsibility of Claudia's finances and everything. So obviously him as a solicitor who didn't, has great knowledge of the law, couldn't figure it out. So it led to him putting forward and eventually getting this act put in place that then makes it easier for others going through this horrific time.
yeah.
So then the next major development in the disappearance was the search at Sandhutton, which is a small village about 6 miles northeast of York and around 8 miles from Heworth, in August of 2021, which I actually remember happening because I used to drive past Sandhutton on my way to work when I used to work at Full Sutton Prison. Such a big deal at the time that they were kind of searching this area in relation to Claudia Lawrence. So Sandhutton gravel pits, which are a group of 3 fishing ponds, were searched due to new information that has never been released by the police. So we're not actually 100% sure what the lead was or what the information was that led to this. At least one of
Mm.
the lakes was drained and ground penetrating radar and cadaver dogs were used. They also did kind of fingertip searches of the lake bed and the surrounding woodland, and still nothing of significance was found. There are, however, 2 Sandhuttons in North Yorkshire, and I'm unsure, like I say, what the exact lead was for them to search the gravel pits. However, there is a Sandhutton village not far from Thirsk. So the difference is the space in the word. So the Sandhutton that they investigated and searched is SAND space HUTTON. And the other Sandhutton that's near Thirsk is SANDHUTTON. So there's no space. And that village isn't far from Thirsk, so that's about 27 miles away from Heworth. And like I say, I don't know what the lead was, so maybe it was obvious which Sandhutton it was, or maybe
Mm.
they made the assumption as to which Sandhutton it was based on the distance.
Mm.
So I think that's important to kind of note there, that they might have searched the wrong area, or
Mm.
they might have searched the right area and it was a false lead.
Yeah.
More worryingly, in 2022, there was a note found near a beauty spot saying, quote, "She is in the water," with arrows pointing in a direction. With the note, there was a small bouquet and a missing poster of Claudia. However, the location was never specified. We don't know where it was, but it is believed to be in North Yorkshire. Detective Chief Inspector John Sygrove states that the investigation is not closed, and as shown by the search of the gravel pits, they will take decisive action on significant information. In 2024 into 2025, an amazing podcast produced by Always True Crime worked closely alongside Joan Lawrence, Claudia's mother, to try and find answers to what happened to Claudia. Answers for Claudia brought Joan's voice into the narrative after it was predominantly Peter Lawrence in the media. The producers and journalist Tom McDermott helped Joan look at theories and leads that come to Joan frequently. Some are serious leads with potential, and others lead them to wild goose chases. Joan outlines clearly in this podcast that she was kept out of the original media coverage. Everything had to go through Peter Lawrence and his representative, Martin Dales. Certainly looking through the media coverage, whilst looking into this case, it is Peter that's solely in the media limelight. Joan states she was kept out of a lot, kept out of fundraising events for Claudia, something which Peter nor Martin can comment on. However, I think it is important to also note this. It is coming from Joan's point of view, but it is backed up in the media where she wasn't involved in the media a lot. which I think a lot of people were surprised at, being the mother of somebody who had gone missing. So in 2025, so only last year, an age-processed image of Claudia at about 51 years old was released to try and trigger new leads. The case is still being treated as a suspected murder. However, hopefully someone will finally come forward, and we will link to this photo in the show notes. So if everybody, all of our listeners, could go have a look and see if this sparks any sort of recollection of this person. So Joan and Peter divorced 9 years before Claudia disappeared, and Joan speaks very openly in the podcast about Peter and the investigation into Claudia's disappearance. Joan expressed her concern to Peter's involvement in the investigation, stating he was, quote, on a pedestal. There seems to be a big divide between Joan and Peter. Joan has an issue with the photo that Peter issued to the press, one that you and anyone who knows the case will be familiar with. However, according to Joan, Claudia no longer looked like the image that was kind of circulated in the media, and it was outdated. So, Melissa, I'm actually going to show you both of these photos. If you could kind of give me your thoughts on them as to whether you think that it could have made an implication on the investigation or not. So the one on the left is the one that Peter put out that Joan says is outdated, and the one on the right is the one that Joan believes looks most like Claudia when she disappeared.
I guess that my immediate thoughts are the one that Peter released, her hair is a lot fairer. It's more light brown to blondish colour, whereas the picture that her mother said was more true to what she was like. She has darker hair. I can see why Peter would have picked the photo that he did to release to the media because her facial features seem the photo is obviously a lot brighter, so you can see her face a lot better. I don't think, personally, aside from the hair colour, I don't think that there's much difference in terms of recognizing her. Like you can see that they're the same person. The only like obvious difference is the photo that Peter released is brighter, so you can see that she's got dark brown eyes, whereas in the other photo, it could be just the light that's like she could have blue eyes or green eyes, and it's just the light that's not as great on that. So yeah, I can't see any striking differences barring the hair colour, and I can understand why that particular photo was taken. I'm sure our listeners can Google the two images
Absolutely.
and see them because we're not sure whether you will be able to. I suppose we can actually put links to where you've obtained these images from in our show notes, and then they
Yeah,
can click on the links and see those two pictures. But yeah,
yeah, definitely. And I think that the argument as to why Joan is upset about this, and again, then like looking into missing people and disappearances and things like that, is that if you're shown a picture of someone who has fairer hair,
hmm
potentially arguably blonde or light brown hair compared to dark brown hair, it could impact your recollection of events. So obviously
definitely.
our memory is not perfect. There are numerous studies done on how things can be construed a certain way in our memory. You can have false memories, you can have this, that, and the other. And I think that looking at those photos, there is a very significantly different hair colour there.
Yeah,
And I think that if you're looking for somebody who's potentially blonde,
yeah,
you might have seen a brunette
yeah,
and discounted that because it's not blonde.
yeah.
So I can
I think
understand, but I do, I'd not kind of thought about it in terms of that photo is better quality. And I'm not saying that he couldn't have maybe used a better quality photo of her having dark hair. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
Nor am I saying that he shouldn't have used the dark hair photo in itself. But I can see what you're saying where, yes, the photo quality is much better and you can see her features more in the photo that was used, but also knowing the issues with memory and recollection, there could be a few issues.
I think it's interesting when you're saying about memory and recollection, because also, how many people do you see on the street every day? And unless that person's doing something weird, like you, or unless you've spoken to that person, and even speaking to them, like we walk the dog every morning and we say hi to people that we pass, I wouldn't be able to tell you what they look like. I wouldn't recognize them if they went missing unless they'd done something odd to me or if I knew them or I saw them frequently. So I think it's interesting. I take your point that obviously you might discount that, but I think unless she was doing something odd, then that she I wouldn't say that the release of these two images or the release of one picture over the other will have impacted witness statements in I mean, I'm not categorically saying that. I'm saying from my own personal experiences of just being a person in the public, I wouldn't remember one over the other unless one person was doing something very odd and standing out, or if I knew them.
Yeah, and I think that you equally as well, like if you said to me, what does your downstairs look like? I don't think I could actually tell you, and I sit there every day. And
Yeah,
I recently got my nose pierced, and mum didn't realise that that was something new about me. So even if you do know somebody, it's not necessarily that obvious if you don't see
no,
them every day. So yeah, I get your point in terms of the media appeals and the release of the photo. But yeah, I definitely
it's
think
worth noting, obviously.
it's definitely something that's worth discussing as to a potential issue with the investigation that happened. So, as we spoke about earlier, obviously there was the issue with the focus and fixation around Claudia's love life following Detective Superintendent Ray Galloway's appearance on Crime Watch. So, it led to the media focusing very much on Claudia's obsession with married men and numerous lovers, which that was something that there was really little evidence to. But again, it shouldn't matter what she was doing in a private life. And again, it's difficult to say whether her private life did play a part in her disappearance and whether the statements were needed. Maybe not exactly how he said it, but whether it was something that they needed to investigate further. But to be fair, can't really argue that they were that important considering we are 17 years on and we are still unaware of what happened to Claudia Lawrence and their family still don't have answers.
Yeah.
So just going to go on to like a few theories that have been investigated so far or potential ideas of what might have happened to Claudia Lawrence, with there being amateur sleuths and other people that are interested in the case, such as us, have proposed several theories within kind of the 17 years, the nearly 17 years that Claudia Lawrence has been missing. And there's some theories that obviously have more potential than others. And some people are, genuinely really interested in the case and really want to provide help. And they have provided invaluable information and have bear in mind that there are real families and friends involved behind the Claudia Lawrence disappearance.
Yeah, and before you go into this, I'm not sure if this is one of her theories, but this is the one that I remember kind of was spread in like the gossipy way. like around the time and like the couple of years after was that she fell into the river. Obviously, York is the river isn't railed, isn't like there's no protection from the river. So I don't know if you discussed that one, but I remember everyone being like, I remember I was 15 at the time that this happened, and 3 years later when we started going out around town drinking, everyone was like, "Oh, you need to be careful, don't fall into the river, don't get drunk, don't do this." And it isn't until like years later when like as I've come to know this case more and I'm like she was potentially on her way to work if it was the morning or like the evening before, like it wasn't that she went on like some mad night out and then fell into the river. Like I remember it being kind of gossipy that that is what happened. So I don't know if you talk about that, but I just from my memory that's quite an interesting kind of, yeah, not theory as such, but something I remember being related to this case, whether it's justified or not.
Yeah, so no, it's not actually one of the theories that I speak about, but I do remember all of that. And I think that that also links to another girl that went missing and she was found in the river. So then I think maybe it was, could that have happened to Claudia Lawrence? I'm not saying that that's what happened because I'm not actually sure exactly the timeline and all of that. But I definitely think that there was another uni student that had gone missing, and I think it turned out that she had fallen into the river. Um,
Yeah,
but it's not one of the big theories that I am going to discuss. But again, something key to note. So I also want to note here just I'm not in a place to say what theory is good or bad. I can only comment on what's known to the investigation in hopes that our podcast might reach somebody who knows what happened to Claudia Lawrence. So, just to sum up a few bits before we dive into the theories. So, we know that her bag with her hair straighteners, chef's whites, her phone, and her keys are gone. So, would she have been staying with somebody the night she was on the phone to her dad and mum? Did she leave after? Did she leave the following morning? We know that the CCTV doesn't pick Claudia up following her getting home. However, there are ways that she can leave her house without being on CCTV. We know that she could get from her house to the pub car park without being on CCTV. So could she have been picked up from there? So one of the theories, which was really popular in the beginning, was that Claudia left her life voluntarily. And I think that this is one that everybody must assume at some point in the investigation. It's an important one to consider. But it was quickly dismissed by all of those close to the investigation. But it had been suggested due to her attachment to Cyprus. So, as you remember, she actually received a message from somebody in Cyprus, a man in Cyprus, the evening of the 18th of March. So she had friends there and she'd actually already considered moving there and had been kind of looking at job prospects there. And one of her friends in Cyprus drives a van basically between the UK and Cyprus, which could have explained how Claudia might have got there without her passport. As we know, her passport was still at home. Her friend denies any involvement, and the police have cleared him in the investigation. In 2009, police officers did actually go to Cyprus. They went to Coral Bay and spoke to Claudia's friends and searched Cyprus, and they didn't find anything. So, although the Cyprus theory is cleared and has been cleared by the police and kind of those close to Claudia, some people do kind of believe that she left of her own accord, maybe did go to Cyprus, maybe she didn't stay there, maybe she went somewhere else. So, that is one to have a think of. So the theory that came up was she a victim of Christopher Halliwell. So he is a British serial killer and former taxi driver convicted of murdering Sian O'Callaghan in 2011 and Becky Godden Edwards in 2003, both in Swindon, Wiltshire. So Halliwell is serving a whole life sentence after pleading guilty to O'Callaghan's murder in 2012 and was convicted of Becky Godden Edwards' murder in 2016. So the former detective who actually caught Halliwell believed that the Claudia Lawrence disappearance kind of fit the pattern of Halliwell's behaviour. So, former Wiltshire detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher said that Halliwell had links to the area where Claudia vanished. Now, links might be very, very kind of loose here because I think he just had links to Yorkshire in general. And some people say that his dad lived near Claudia's house. However, other sources say that it was in Huddersfield, which is not anywhere close to York. So potentially not. So Halliwell seems to have been cleared due to examinations of digital devices. They interviewed several witnesses, and it was indicated that Halliwell kind of continued to operate in the Swindon area as a taxi driver. And both investigation teams kind of reached a point where it was concluded that it was unlikely that Halliwell had left the Wiltshire area or was present in North Yorkshire at the time of Claudia's disappearance.
So one of the final theories that I'm going to cover, and it's certainly not the only three theories in this case because there are lots, but I think that these three are kind of like the standout ones. So this final one is that someone in the local area must know what happened to Claudia Lawrence, and police have made several statements regarding that someone known to Claudia had something to do with it. However, everyone close to her has been investigated, and currently everyone has been cleared, including Peter, her dad, who had an alibi. So one of the things that came to light from the Answers for Claudia podcast was some statements from Jen King. So Jen King is one of Claudia's friends from Hewer. And she makes some kind of bizarre statements throughout kind of her interview with Tom. And she says that statistically it should be one of us, meaning like the friendship group. And then she goes, statistically, it will be one of us. And then she basically goes, but I know that it wasn't me. And I just think that it's an interesting choice of words that she uses when she's like saying that she, like her and like her friends don't know what's happened.
Mm.
I think it's interesting to be like, yeah, statistically it should be one of us, and statistically it will be one of us. And I'm like, well, who do you think it is then?
Mm.
If you like a big friendship group. And I just think that that's an interesting choice of words. Now, I'm not saying that she did it. I'm not saying that one of her friends did do it. I just want to note that that's an interesting statement to be making.
Yeah, and like I think statistically you'd think it'd be one of us, but then to say statistically it will be,
Yeah.
I think it's yeah, like you say, it's that phrasing of like will be, as in like
It's almost admitting guilt.
yeah, it's as if it is and you've just not found that out yet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how like I heard it. And like I don't
Mm.
know how anybody else hears that. And like, yes, statistically it is somebody close to you that, you know, I don't actually know what the proper statistics are, and maybe I should have researched that for this. But like more often than not, anyone who is murdered, it is somebody who is known to them. It's not just some random person.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, people pick up on stuff like this all the time, don't they? With cases, and sometimes there's something to it, and sometimes there's something not. But yeah, it's interesting to know for sure whether it means anything or not. Obviously, time will hopefully tell us.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to sit on the sofa today with a cuppa and make
Mm.
statements towards what people have said during conversations or during the heats of moments and things like that. And it doesn't always mean anything, like you say. It could mean something, it could not. And we all have this kind of, well, this is how you should act and this is what you should say in these situations. But until you're in it, you don't know what you're going to say and what you're not going to say. Um,
Yeah.
and maybe she'd been doing some research on missing people and it was saying, and she's got in her head the statistics and everything. So you just don't know. But yeah, definitely something to note there. And then further, something else that Jen King says, which I think is quite interesting. So Tom, the journalist who is working with Joan and is kind of the big voice in this podcast, asks Jen, who obviously was part of the friendship group with Peter as well, quote, what was Peter like? And then Jen King says that, quote, I never saw anything untoward or anything that caused me any concern for his credibility as a dad. And again, I think that that's something very interesting considering the question was, what was Peter like? You never questioned
Yeah.
his character. And I mean, I wasn't there in that conversation. I don't exactly know what was talked about previously or kind of what came up afterwards. But that would raise my eyebrows. That has raised my
Yeah.
eyebrows in like, well, what have you seen?
Yeah. Also, what does it mean credibility as a dad?
I know.
Like, that makes it sound as if he's not her father.
Yeah, or he's done something undad-like was where my brain
Yeah,
went.
but
And
even
I don't want to like mention anything because I am not
accusing anybody.
I'm
Yeah.
not accusing him. I'm not slandering his name. I'm not doing anything. I'm just that was where my brain went like, well, has he done something that's maybe not dad-like? Just
I
with
don't
it
know
being
the word.
credibility as a dad, like,
Yeah, it's the word credibility, I think, for me. Like, credibility as a subject, as a suspect, yeah, that makes sense. But like, not as a dad. Like, her dad,
yeah.
like, I don't know. If I was talking about somebody's behavior being like not dad-like, I'd be saying like, oh well, they didn't really act like he was her father. Like he did some like questionable things, like his actions or the way he spoke to her was questionable. Not talking about his credibility. To me, credibility as a dad makes it sound as if he's not related to her,
Yeah,
as opposed to anything else. To me, I think that's a really weird choice of phrasing.
yeah, I think it's just with her saying like anything untoward or cause me concern, which made me think down a different route,
Yeah.
using the kind of the phrasing untoward, like, and concern. It,
But then I would,
I
yeah,
don't know if
I'd
it
take that.
implicates something. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's an
I,
interesting quote.
I feel like they're two different things because to me, I never saw anything untoward or anything that caused me any concern. That's it.
Yeah,
Not about, I don't know. Yeah, it's
it's
just word phrasing.
it is very weird phrasing, and almost unprompted. I don't know. Like I say, I wasn't involved in the interview or anything like that. I've heard
Yeah.
snippets and what the Answers for Claudia podcast has put out, and I just think that it's worth noting that there's maybe a bit of a question mark with people close to Claudia.
Yeah, and I suppose what we don't know is how rehearsed or practiced these answers were, whether they had the questions in advance, like how spontaneous it was. Obviously, if you're speaking spontaneously, trying to formulate an answer, it can be quite difficult to come out with the correct words and phrasing and things. But I feel like you would also potentially be like, no, I don't mean like, can we edit that? Like, I want to rephrase that because like that doesn't sound right or something. But yeah, just yeah, interesting to think about for sure.
Yeah, and like I say, I am not questioning Peter nor any of the friends. I am not in a position to be doing that. I am just kind of noting what is out there already. And it is
Yeah.
difficult to question the legacy of a grieving father. And he can't defend himself. He has sadly passed away. But
Right.
like I say, it's important to note the juxtaposition between kind of his maybe two sides or kind of different parts of him, because again, nobody is perfect and you can make mistakes and you can say the wrong things, and that doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you human, I guess.
Mm.
So you don't know what's happened and exactly why potentially things have been said how they've been said, but yeah, he's definitely been a big advocate for missing people, and there's been, I've heard so many things that have highlighted him as this angel and this great person and figure for and voice for missing people and the people who are going through, and like
Mm.
the families that are going through dealing with missing people.
Yeah.
And that is very much highlighted in all of the articles. So yeah, I just think that it's important to note kind of all of it.
Mm.
I think also key to note in the realm of someone close to Claudia must know what's happened or has been involved. I think we talked about this earlier, and it's strange that when she didn't turn up to the pub on the Thursday, so Thursday the 19th of March, that
Yeah.
her friends didn't pop around to a house just to check. So yeah, like we said earlier, like
Yeah.
we would have definitely kind of given them a ring or popped round since they were that close. But then
Yeah.
again, like we said, it's hard to say what you would do, and I'm sure in hindsight they would do that, but they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
However, all the people close to the investigation have been cleared, but the police still believe that someone in the close-knit circle must know something. And although what happened to Claudia Lawrence is still unknown, it's clear that North Yorkshire police aren't giving up. There's been a lot of heartbreak for the friends and family of Claudia. However, during this horrific time, there has been something good to come out of Claudia's disappearance, which was Claudia's Law, which earned Peter an OBE, and he became the face of Missing People's Charity. And I think that if you're interested in doing a bit of a deeper dive into this case, I urge you to listen to the podcast Answers for Claudia, where journalist Tom McDermott is exploring the disappearance of Claudia with her mother Joan. He built a close and trusting friendship with Joan, and Tom tells her story in this powerful podcast. Peter never stopped looking for answers, and he never got them. Joan and Ali will never stop looking for answers, and hopefully they get them. I just hope that this podcast can help. If you have any information, no matter how little, you think will help get answers for Claudia and her family, please call 101 and pass details to the Force Control Room, or report it via the website, or you can contact Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111 or visit their website. And that's the complex case of the disappearance of Claudia Lawrence. And join us next week for Melissa's episode on Peter Sutcliffe. Stay safe.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Make sure you like, follow, and leave us a review if you enjoyed it.
All episodes are written and presented by Melissa and Georgina Scora.
Editing is by Vicky Hunter.
All of our sources can be found in our show notes or on our website.
Take care.
Stay safe out there.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.